The bullet that grazed Benjamin Turner's shoulder on her wedding day 6 years ago hadn't killed her husband, but the fever that followed 3 days later had, and she swore on his grave she would never give her heart to another man as long as she lived. Now, standing behind the bar of the Lucky Silver Saloon in Piach, Nevada in the summer of 1878, she poured whiskey for dusty miners and drifters while keeping her heart locked up tighter than the safe in the back room. And she figured that was exactly how things would stay until the day a tall cowboy with sun-weathered skin and startlingly green eyes walked through the door and looked at her like she was the answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was saying. Benjamin wiped down the bar with practiced efficiency, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a simple bun that kept the strands off her neck in the oppressive Nevada heat. At 24, she had learned to navigate the rough world of a mining town saloon with a sharp tongue and sharper instincts. The Lucky Silver wasn't the worst establishment in Piach, but it wasn't the finest either. It sat somewhere in the middle, respectable enough that decent folk could drink there without shame, rough enough that fights broke out on Friday nights when the miners got their pay. The cowboy who walked in that Thursday afternoon carried himself different from the usual clientele. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, his dusty brown hat pulled low over his eyes, leather chaps showing the wear of long days in the saddle. When he reached the bar and pushed his hat back, Benjamin got her first good look at his face and felt something twist uncomfortably in her chest, a feeling she immediately pushed down and buried. "Whiskey," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried a Texas drawl. "And whatever information you might have about work in these parts." Benjamin poured him a glass without comment, sliding it across the scarred wood of the bar. "Mining work. You go to the superintendent's office at the Raymond and Ely. Ranch work. You are out of luck. This is silver country, not cattle country." The cowboy took a sip of his whiskey and studied her with those unsettling green eyes. "Name is Cole Tanner, and I appreciate the direction, though I was hoping for something that keeps me above ground rather than below it. Most men who come to Piach are looking to get rich quick in the mines," Benjamin said, already turning away to serve another customer. "If that does not interest you, you might want to try your luck in another town." Cole Tanner did not leave. He finished his whiskey, paid with coins that clinked softly on the bar, and thanked her with a politeness that seemed almost out of place in the rough saloon. Benjamin watched him go, telling herself she felt nothing but mild curiosity about the stranger, and she almost believed it. But Cole Tanner came back the next day, and the day after that. He took a job working security for one of the smaller mining operations, a position that kept him above ground and allowed him to use the skills he had developed during years of ranch work and the occasional stint as a lawman. He came into the Lucky Silver each evening after his shift, always polite, always proper, and always watching Benjamin with an intensity that made her deeply uncomfortable. On the fourth evening, he spoke to her beyond ordering his drink. "You got a name, or should I just keep thinking of you as the pretty woman who pours the whiskey?" "Benjamin Turner," she said shortly, emphasizing the misses with her tone even though she wore no ring. She had sold her wedding band 2 years back when money got tight, but she still considered herself a married woman in all the ways that mattered. "Pleasure to know you, Mrs. Turner," Cole said, respectful enough that she could not take offense. "You from Piach originally?" "That is none of your concern." "Fair enough." He sipped his whiskey, unbothered by her sharp tone. "I am from Texas myself, came out west after the war looking for something different." Benjamin said nothing, hoping her silence would discourage further conversation. It did not work. "You know what I think," Cole said, leaning forward slightly. "I think you are the saddest woman I have seen in a long time, And I think whatever put that sadness in your eyes happened a while back, and I think you have been carrying it alone ever since." The words hit too close to home, and Benjamin felt her defenses snap into place like a steel trap. "I think you should keep your observations to yourself and drink your whiskey." "Yes, madam," Cole said, but there was something in his expression, a gentleness mixed with determination, that told Benjamin this conversation was not over, merely postponed. She tried to ignore him after that, but it proved impossible. Cole Tanner had a way of being present without being intrusive, of offering help without making it seem like charity. When a drunk miner got aggressive with her one night, Cole was out of his chair and at the bar before she could even call for help, his hand on the miner's shoulder and his voice calm, but firm as he suggested the man go sleep it off. When she mentioned needing someone to fix a broken shutter at her small house on the edge of town, Cole showed up the next morning with tools and steady hands, refusing payment and only accepting a cup of coffee as thanks. "Why are you doing this?" Benjamin finally asked him one evening 3 weeks after they had first met. The saloon was quiet, the afternoon lull before the evening rush, and they were alone except for old Pete sleeping off his daily drunk in the corner. Cole looked at her directly. No games, no pretense. "Because I would like to know you better. Because I think underneath all that armor you wear, there is a woman worth knowing. And because life is too short to not take a chance on something that might be good." "I am not interested in whatever you think this is," Benjamin said, her voice firm despite the way her heart had started beating faster. "I was married once. I loved my husband. He died, and that part of my life is over." "I am sorry for your loss," Cole said, and he sounded like he meant it. "But being a widow does not mean you have to be alone for the rest of your life." "I choose to be alone. Do you? Or are you just scared of what it might mean to choose something different?" Benjamin felt anger flare in her chest, hot and defensive. "You do not know anything about me or what I have been through. You have no right to make judgments about my choices." Cole held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "You are right, and I apologize. I overstepped." He stood, placing coins on the bar for his unfinished drink. "But I want you to know something, Mrs. Turner. I am not going anywhere. I took this job, I like this town, and I intend to stay. And I intend to keep coming in here for my evening whiskey. If that bothers you, I will sit at a different spot at the bar and leave you be. But if it does not, if maybe some small part of you is even a little curious about what might happen if you let those walls down just an inch, then I will be here. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility." He left before she could respond, and Benjamin stood behind the bar feeling like the ground had shifted under her feet. She told herself she was not curious, that Cole Tanner was just another cowboy passing through, that his words meant nothing. But that night, lying in her bed in the small house she had lived in alone for 6 years, she could not stop thinking about the earnest look in his green eyes or the steady certainty in his voice when he said he was not going anywhere. The next few weeks established a routine. Cole came in every evening, sat at the same spot at the bar, ordered his whiskey, and talked to Benjamin if she seemed inclined to talk or sat in comfortable silence if she did not. He told her stories about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about serving in the Confederate Army at 16 and spending the years after trying to find his place in a world that had changed beyond recognition. He spoke about his family, parents long dead, a sister married and living in Kansas with 4 children, a brother who had gone to California and never been heard from again. Benjamin found herself listening despite her best intentions, and eventually, slowly, she began to share pieces of her own story. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, About meeting her husband Robert when she was 17 and he was 20, about how they had married and headed west looking for opportunity. She told him about the silver strike in Piach, about how Robert had worked as a clerk for one of the mining companies, about how they had been happy in a simple, quiet way. What she did not tell him, what she could not bring herself to speak aloud, was about the wedding 6 years ago. Not her own wedding, which had been a small affair at a church in St. Louis, but the wedding of a friend from the mining company. Robert had been standing outside the church when the shooting started, some argument between two miners that had escalated to violence. The bullet had been meant for someone else, but it had found Robert instead, tearing through his shoulder and sending him crashing to the ground. The wound itself had not been fatal, but infection had set in fast and hard, and 3 days later Benjamin had watched her husband die in their small bed, delirious with fever, calling for his mother and crying out in pain. She had buried him in the Piach cemetery, surrounded by dozens of other graves from men who had died in mining accidents, gunfights, and all the casual violence of a rough mining town. She had stood at his grave and made her vow, had locked her heart away and thrown away the key, had decided that loving someone and losing them hurt too much to ever risk again. Cole seemed to sense there were parts of her story she was not ready to share, and he did not push. Instead, he simply kept showing up, kept being steady and reliable and kind. He fixed her front steps when they started to rot, brought her fresh vegetables from the Chinese gardens on the edge of town, walked her home when her shifts at the saloon ran late and the streets were dark and dangerous. "You do not have to do this," Benjamin told him one night as they walked down the dusty main street of Piach, the distant sound of a piano playing in one of the other saloons drifting through the air. "I know," Cole said. "I want to." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, the only sound their footsteps on the hard, packed dirt. "Because I have spent the last 15 years drifting from place to place, never putting down roots, never letting myself care too much about anything or anyone. I thought that was what freedom looked like. Turns out it was just loneliness wearing a different hat." They reached her house, a small structure with peeling paint and a roof that leaked when the rare Nevada rains came. Benjamin turned to face him, studying his features in the moonlight. "And you think I am the solution to your loneliness?" "No," Cole said honestly. "I think maybe we could be the solution to each other's loneliness if you were willing to take that chance." "I am not," Benjamin said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Not yet," Cole agreed, "but maybe someday." He tipped his hat to her and walked away, leaving Benjamin standing on her front step with her heart beating hard and her carefully constructed walls feeling less solid than they had in years. Summer blazed into fall, and Cole Tanner kept his word. He stayed in Piach, kept his job, kept coming to the Lucky Silver every evening. Benjamin found herself looking for him as the afternoon wore into evening, found herself disappointed on the rare occasions when he did not show up, found herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the day. The other girls who worked at the saloon noticed, of course. Martha, a curvy redhead with a sharp wit and a kind heart, cornered Benjamin in the back room one evening in early October. "You need to either give that cowboy a chance or tell him to stop coming around," Martha said bluntly. "Watching the two of you dance around each other is painful." "There is no dancing," Benjamin protested. "He is a customer, nothing more." Martha gave her a look that clearly said she did not believe a word of that. "Honey, that man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. And unless I am very much mistaken, you feel the same way about him, even if you are too stubborn to admit it." "I was married," Benjamin said, the words coming out sharp and defensive. "I loved my husband." "I know you did," Martha said, her voice gentling. "We all know your story, Benjamin. But Robert has been dead for 6 years. 6 years. Do you really think he would want you to spend the rest of your life alone, punishing yourself for the crime of surviving? The words hit Benjamin like a physical blow. I am not punishing myself. Are you sure about that? Benjamin did not have an answer, and Martha left her alone with her thoughts and the uncomfortable feeling that maybe, just maybe, her friend was right. That evening, when Cole came in and took his usual spot at the bar, Benjamin found herself really looking at him. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the scar on his jaw that he had gotten from a horse kick when he was 12, the calluses on his hands from hard work. She noticed the way other women in the saloon looked at him with interest, and the way he politely but firmly discouraged their advances. She noticed that he only had eyes for her and had from the very first day. "Can I ask you something?" Benjamin said, pouring him his whiskey. "Anything." "Why me? You could have your pick of women in this town. Martha would say yes in a heartbeat, and she is prettier and sweeter and a lot less difficult than I am." Cole took a sip of his whiskey, considering his words carefully. "Martha is a fine woman, but she is not who I want. You are smart and strong, and you have survived things that would have broken other people. You run this bar like a general runs an army. You take care of yourself, and you do not need anybody. But I keep thinking about what it might be like if you decided you wanted somebody, and if that somebody was me." "I do not believe in second chances," Benjamin said quietly. "I had my chance at love. It ended. That is the way of things." Cole set down his glass and looked at her with such intensity that she could not look away. "I will prove you wrong." The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and a promise all at once. Benjamin felt something crack in the walls around her heart, just a small fissure but a crack nonetheless. "You cannot," she whispered. "Watch me." The next day was Sunday, the one day of the week when the Lucky Silver was closed and Benjamin had time to herself. She usually spent it doing chores, washing clothes, trying to make her small house feel like less of a prison and more of a home. But that Sunday morning, Cole Tanner knocked on her door with a basket in his hands and a determined look on his face. "What are you doing here?" Benjamin asked, very aware that she was wearing her plainest dress, and her hair was loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual severe bun. "I am taking you on a picnic," Cole announced. "And before you say no, let me point out that it is a beautiful day, you have the day off, and I went to a lot of trouble to get proper food from the hotel restaurant. I did not agree to this. I know. That is why I am not asking. I am telling you that we are going on a picnic, and you can either come willing or I can throw you over my shoulder and carry you. But either way, you are leaving this house and spending the day doing something other than working yourself to death." Benjamin should have been angry at his presumption. Instead, she found herself fighting back a smile. "You would not dare." Cole grinned, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and more carefree. "Try me." 10 minutes later, Benjamin found herself riding behind Cole on his horse, her arms around his waist and the basket tied to the saddle, heading out of town toward the hills that surrounded Piotch. She told herself she was only going along with this because it was easier than arguing, but the truth was that the feel of the sun on her face and the solid warmth of Cole's back against her chest felt good in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. They rode for about half an hour, following a trail that wound up into the hills until they reached a spot where a spring created a small pool of water surrounded by cottonwood trees. It was a little oasis in the harsh Nevada landscape, and Benjamin caught her breath at the unexpected beauty of it. "How did you find this place?" she asked as Cole helped her down from the horse, asked around. "One of the miners told me about it, said it was where he used to bring his wife before she passed." Cole spread out a blanket near the water and began unpacking the basket. Figured if it was a good spot for courting then, it would work just as well now. "This is not courting," Benjamin said automatically, but she sat down on the blanket anyway. "Sure it is." Cole handed her a sandwich wrapped in paper. "This is me proving you wrong about second chances." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the gentle trickle of the spring and the rustle of wind through the cottonwood leaves. Benjamin had to admit that the food was good, better than the simple meals she usually made for herself. There was roasted chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and even a small jar of pickles. "You really did go to a lot of trouble," she said, biting into an apple. "You are worth the trouble." Benjamin did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They finished eating, and Cole packed away the remains of the meal. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled out a harmonica from his pocket and began to play. The music was simple and sweet, a melody that spoke of longing and hope and the kind of quiet joy that came from simple pleasures. Benjamin closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, and for the first time in 6 years, she let herself feel something other than grief and determination to simply survive. When the song ended, she opened her eyes to find Cole watching her. "That was beautiful. Where did you learn to play?" "My father taught me. Said every man should know how to make music because music feeds the soul in ways that food never can." Cole tucked the harmonica back in his pocket. "Will you tell me about him?" "Your husband?" Benjamin stiffened, her automatic defenses rising, but Cole held up a hand. "You do not have to if you do not want to. But I think maybe you have been carrying this alone for so long that it has become heavier than it needs to be. Sometimes sharing the burden makes it lighter." Something about the quiet understanding in his voice made Benjamin's carefully maintained composure crack. And suddenly, unexpectedly, she found herself talking. She told him everything. About Robert, about the wedding, about the random bullet that had stolen her future in an instant. She told him about watching her husband die, about making her vow at his grave, about the 6 years of loneliness and grief and stubborn determination to never feel that kind of pain again. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face, and she was angry at herself for crying, for showing weakness, for letting Cole see the parts of her she kept hidden from the world. But Cole did not look uncomfortable or eager to escape. He simply pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her, then sat quietly while she collected herself. "I am sorry," Benjamin finally said, wiping her eyes. "I did not mean to fall apart like that. Nothing to be sorry for. Grief is not something you get over. It is something you learn to carry." Cole's voice was gentle. "But Benjamin, punishing yourself by refusing to live is not honoring your husband's memory. It is just making sure his death claimed 2 victims instead of 1. The words were almost exactly what Martha had said, and hearing them again from Cole made them impossible to ignore. "I am scared," Benjamin admitted, the words barely more than a whisper. "What if I let myself care about someone again and lose them? I do not think I could survive that pain a second time." "You might lose them," Cole said honestly. "Life does not come with guarantees, but you might not. You might have 50 happy years together. And even if you do not, even if you only get 1 year or 5 years or 10, would not having that time together be worth the risk of eventual loss?" Benjamin looked at him, this cowboy who had walked into her life and refused to be deterred by her walls and her sharp words and her determination to keep everyone at a distance. "Why are you so persistent? Most men would have given up weeks ago." "Because I know what it is like to be alone even when you are surrounded by people. Because I see in you something worth fighting for. And because from the first moment I walked into that saloon and saw you, I knew." Cole reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, and his fingers were gentle as they curled around hers. "I knew you were going to change my life. I just had to convince you to let me change yours too." Benjamin looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was stroking softly across her knuckles, at the simple intimacy of the gesture. 6 years of loneliness and grief and fear, warred with the growing realization that Cole Tanner was offering her something precious, something rare, something she had convinced herself she did not deserve. "I do not know how to do this anymore," she said, her voice small and uncertain in a way it rarely was. "I do not know how to let someone in. Then let me show you." Cole raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, the gesture old-fashioned and sweet and utterly sincere. "One day at a time, one moment at a time. No pressure, no rushing. Just you and me figuring this out together." Benjamin felt the last of her walls crumble, felt 6 years of armor fall away, felt herself take the terrifying leap of choosing hope over fear. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, yes. I will try." The smile that broke across Cole's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He did not pull her into his arms or try to kiss her, though she could see the desire to do both in his eyes. Instead, he just held her hand and smiled at her like she had given him the greatest gift in the world. They stayed at the spring until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, talking and laughing and slowly learning the shape of this new thing growing between them. Cole told her more about his life, about his dreams of maybe buying a small ranch someday, of raising horses and cattle and building something lasting. Benjamin found herself talking about her own dreams, things she had not let herself think about in years. A real home, not just a house. Maybe children someday, though the thought still scared her. A future that was about more than just surviving day to day. When they rode back to Piotch as the evening star appeared in the darkening sky, Benjamin kept her arms around Cole's waist and let herself enjoy the simple pleasure of being close to him. At her door, he helped her down from the horse and looked at her with a question in his eyes. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and Benjamin appreciated that he asked instead of just taking. "Yes," she said, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and sweet and tasting of apples and possibility. It was different from kissing Robert, and that was okay. This was not about replacing what she had lost. It was about finding something new. When they finally broke apart, both breathing a little harder, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day I met you." "Why did you wait so long?" "Because you needed time. Because I needed you to choose this, not just give in." He kissed her forehead, then stepped back. "I will see you tomorrow at the saloon." "Tomorrow," Benjamin agreed, and she stood on her front step and watched him ride away, her lips still tingling and her heart feeling lighter than it had in 6 long years. The next weeks were a revelation. Cole courted her properly, with flowers when he could find them in the harsh Nevada landscape, with small gifts and thoughtful gestures, with patience and kindness, and a steady presence that made Benjamin feel safe in a way she had forgotten was possible. They went on more picnics, took walks around Piotch in the evening when the heat had died down, sat together in the small cemetery where Robert was buried because Cole understood that honoring her past was important even as she moved toward a future. The town noticed, of course. In a place as small as Piotch, nothing stayed secret for long. Some people were happy for her, like Martha, who declared herself responsible for the entire romance, even though Benjamin pointed out she had done nothing but offer unsolicited advice. Others were less kind, whispering that it was disrespectful to her late husband's memory, that she was moving on too quickly even though 6 years had passed. Benjamin found she did not care what the gossip said. For the first time since Robert's death, she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. She smiled more, laughed more, felt like she was living instead of just existing. Cole had proven his point thoroughly and completely. Second chances were possible, even for broken hearts that had convinced themselves they were beyond repair. In November, the first snow of the season dusted the hills around Piotch, and Cole showed up at the Lucky Silver on a quiet Tuesday afternoon with a nervous expression and a small box in his hands. "I know this is fast," he said, setting the box on the bar between them. "And I know you might think it is too soon, but I also know that when something is right, waiting does not make it any more right. It just means you spend more time waiting instead of living." Benjamin's heart was pounding as she looked at the box. She knew what it was, had known from the moment she saw the nervous hope in Cole's eyes. "Cole, let me say this first." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Benjamin Turner. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you try so hard to keep people at a distance, but care so deeply underneath all that armor. I love the way you laugh when something really tickles you, and the way you bite your lip when you are thinking hard about something. I love that you are not looking for someone to take care of you because you are perfectly capable of taking care of yourself. And I love that you chose to let me in anyway, even though I know how hard that was for you." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. It was not fancy or expensive, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. "Marry me. Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you every single day that taking a chance on second chances was the right choice." Benjamin looked at the ring, then at Cole, then back at the ring. 6 months ago, she would have said no without hesitation. 3 months ago, she would have been terrified. But now, standing in the saloon that had been her prison and her refuge for so many years, looking at the man who had stubbornly refused to accept her walls as permanent, she felt nothing but certainty. "Yes," she said, and the word came out strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." Cole's whoop of joy was loud enough to wake old Pete in the corner, and then Benjamin was in his arms and he was spinning her around, and she was laughing, actually laughing, with pure happiness. He set her down and slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made just for her. They married in December on a cold, clear day with Martha serving as witness and half the town showing up to watch, even though they had only invited a handful of people. Benjamin wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and Cole wore his best suit and looked so handsome that she could barely breathe when she saw him waiting for her at the front of the small church. The ceremony was short and sweet, conducted by a circuit preacher who traveled between the mining towns. Benjamin's voice was steady as she spoke her vows, promising to love and honor this man who had shown her that hearts could heal and that second chances were not just possible but precious. When Cole slid a matching gold band onto her finger next to the engagement ring and promised to cherish her for all the days of their lives, she felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Cole cupped her face in his hands and kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They had the reception at the Lucky Silver, which seemed fitting since that was where their story had begun. Benjamin had given her notice the week before, telling the owner she would be leaving at the end of the month. She and Cole had talked about their future, about the small ranch he wanted to buy, about leaving Piotch behind and starting fresh somewhere new. But first, they had their wedding night, which Cole had arranged for them to spend at the nicest hotel in town, a luxury Benjamin had never experienced. He carried her over the threshold of the room, making her laugh, then set her down gently and looked at her with such love and desire that she felt her breath catch. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, ever considerate, ever making sure she was choosing this freely. In answer, Benjamin reached up and pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. Then she stepped close to him and began unbuttoning his shirt. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. What followed was tender and sweet, and everything a wedding night should be. Cole was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished, showing her with his hands and mouth and body that she was loved beyond measure. Benjamin let herself be vulnerable in a way she had not been since Robert's death. Let herself feel and need and want without fear or reservation. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the soft hotel bed, and Benjamin rested her head on Cole's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For not giving up on me. For being persistent. For proving me wrong about second chances." Cole kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stubborn cowboy who took one look at you and knew his wandering days were over." They spent the next few weeks preparing to leave Piotch. Cole sold his horse and gear, settling his affairs and saying goodbye to the men he had worked with. Benjamin packed up her small house, sorting through her belongings and deciding what to take and what to leave behind. At the cemetery, she stood at Robert's grave one last time and spoke to him in her heart, thanking him for the happy years they had shared and telling him she was ready to move forward now. In January of 1879, Cole and Benjamin left Piotch and headed north toward Oregon, where Cole had heard about ranch land available for reasonable prices. They traveled by stagecoach part of the way, then bought a wagon and horses for the rest of the journey. It was hard travel, with cold nights and long days, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. They reached the Willamette Valley in late March, when the first spring flowers were beginning to bloom and the world felt fresh and new and full of promise. Cole found a piece of land that made his eyes light up. 200 acres with a good stream running through it, timber for building, and open meadows perfect for grazing cattle. It took most of their combined savings to buy it, but when Benjamin saw the way Cole looked at that land, she knew it was worth every penny. They spent the spring and summer of 1879 building their life together. Cole constructed a small cabin with help from their nearest neighbors, a family named the Johnsons who lived 3 miles down the valley. Benjamin planted a garden, started chickens, and began making the cabin into a home. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done at the Lucky Silver, but it was good work, satisfying work, work that meant something because she was building a future instead of just surviving the present. By fall, they had a dozen cattle, a roof that did not leak, and a bedroom with a real bed frame that Cole had built with his own hands. Benjamin had also discovered she was pregnant, news she shared with Cole on a cool October evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over their land. "Are you happy about it?" Cole asked, his hand immediately going to her still flat stomach. "Terrified," Benjamin admitted. "But yes, happy. Are you?" "Over the moon." He kissed her soft and sweet. "You are going to be an amazing mother. The pregnancy was not easy." Benjamin was sick for the first few months, and as she grew larger, the simple tasks of daily life became more challenging. But Cole was there every step of the way, taking on extra work without complaint, rubbing her aching back, holding her when the fears about childbirth and motherhood became overwhelming. Their son was born in June of 1880, delivered by Mrs. Johnson and another neighbor woman while Cole paced anxiously outside. It was a long, difficult labor, and there were moments when Benjamin was sure she was going to die, moments when she wondered if this was her punishment for daring to be happy again. But then she heard the baby cry, a lusty, angry wail that spoke of health and strength, and Mrs. Johnson was placing a tiny, wrinkled, perfect boy in her arms. "You did it," the older woman said with a smile. You have a son." Cole was allowed in a few minutes later, and the look on his face when he saw Benjamin holding their baby was something she would treasure forever. Wonder, love, pride, joy, and a fierce protectiveness all mixed together. "What should we name him?" Benjamin asked, running her finger over the baby's downy soft head. Cole thought for a moment, then said, "How about Robert, after your first husband? He might be gone, but he was part of making you who you are, and I think it would be a good way to honor that." Benjamin felt tears spring to her eyes at the generosity and understanding in that suggestion. "Robert Cole Tanner," she said. "That sounds perfect." Little Robert was a good baby, though he kept them busy from dawn to dusk. Benjamin discovered that she loved being a mother, though it was harder than anything she had ever done. Cole was a devoted father, happy to walk the floor with a crying baby, to change diapers, to do whatever was needed. They worked together as a team, just as they did with everything else in their life. 2 years later, their second son was born, an easier birth that produced a quieter baby they named David. 2 years after that came twins, a boy and girl they named Thomas and Clara. Their cabin seemed to burst at the seams with children and noise and love, and Cole built additions to give them more space, expanding their home as their family expanded. The ranch prospered too. Cole had a gift for ranching, and their herd grew from 12 cattle to over 100. They hired help during the busy seasons, took on a permanent ranch hand when the work became too much for Cole to handle alone. Money was never plentiful, but it was enough. More than enough, because they had each other and their children and the life they had built together. Benjamin sometimes thought about her vow in the Piotch cemetery, about how certain she had been that she would never love again. She thought about how wrong she had been, and how grateful she was that Cole Tanner had been stubborn enough to prove it to her. Second chances were real, and they were precious, and they were worth every moment of fear and vulnerability required to seize them. On a summer evening in 1890, Benjamin and Cole sat on the porch of their now substantial house and watched their children play in the yard. Robert, now 10, was teaching David how to throw a rope. The twins, both 6, were having a serious conversation with the barn cat. Inside, their newest addition, a daughter named Grace born just 2 months earlier, slept peacefully in her cradle. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked, taking Cole's hand. "Taking a chance on a bitter saloon woman who was determined to push you away." Cole squeezed her hand and smiled. "Not for a single second. Best decision I ever made was walking into the Lucky Silver and deciding that the sad woman behind the bar was going to be my wife, whether she knew it yet or not." Benjamin laughed, the sound free and easy. "You were insufferably arrogant. I was confident. There is a difference." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you regret letting me prove you wrong?" "Never." Benjamin looked at their children, at the ranch spread out before them, at the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. "I thought I knew what my life was going to be. I thought the story was over. But you showed me it was just the end of one chapter and the beginning of a whole new book." "And what a book it has been," Cole said, kissing the top of her head. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower in the sky, painting everything gold and pink and orange. Inside, baby Grace began to fuss, and Benjamin rose to tend to her. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at Cole, at this man who had refused to accept her walls, who had patiently and persistently shown her that second chances were not just possible but beautiful. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now after years of practice. "I love you too," Cole replied. "Always have, always will." Benjamin went inside to tend to their daughter, and Cole stayed on the porch watching their sons and daughter play, and in that moment, Everything was exactly as it should be. The past was honored but not allowed to dictate the future. The present was rich with love and family, and all the small, precious moments that made up a life well lived. And the future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility, and all the joy that came from taking a chance on second chances. 20 years later, in the summer of 1910, Cole and Benjamin sat in the same spot on the porch of their ranch house, now even more expanded to accommodate visiting grandchildren. Robert had married and settled on an adjacent piece of land, working the ranch alongside his father. David had become a teacher in the nearby town, married to a sweet woman who gave them 3 grandchildren. Thomas had followed in his grandfather's footsteps and joined the army, serving with distinction and honor. Clara had married a banker and moved to Portland, returning often with her 2 children. And Grace, their youngest, was 18 now and being courted by a young man from church, much to Cole's grumbling displeasure. Benjamin's hair was streaked with gray now, and Cole's face was more weathered, lines carved deep from years of working outside. But they still held hands on the porch, still looked at each other with love, still cherished every day they had together. 50 years since I walked into that saloon, Cole said one evening, doing the math. Well, not quite 50, but close enough. 31 years since we married, Benjamin corrected. The best 31 years of my life. Mine too. Cole squeezed her hand. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for letting me prove you wrong, for giving us this life. Benjamin looked out at the ranch, at the legacy they had built, at the family they had created. She thought about Robert, her first husband, buried in a cemetery in Nevada, and sent him a thought of gratitude for the years they had shared. She thought about the woman she had been in Piotch, bitter and lonely and convinced she was protecting herself by refusing to feel. And she thought about the woman she had become, this wife and mother and grandmother who had learned that the human heart was far more resilient than she had ever imagined. That love did not diminish with loss, but grew and expanded and found new ways to bloom. Thank you for not giving up on me, Benjamin said, leaning into Cole's warmth. Thank you for seeing past my walls to who I really was underneath. Thank you for showing me that I did not have to spend the rest of my life alone just because I was afraid of being hurt again. Cole kissed her temple, the gesture familiar and comforting after decades of marriage. You made it easy. You were always worth fighting for, even when you did not believe it yourself. They sat in companionable silence as the sun set on another day, on another year, on a life that had turned out richer and fuller and more beautiful than either of them had dared to dream. Inside the house, they could hear Grace laughing at something, the sound young and vibrant and full of all the promise that youth carried. She is going to say yes to that young man, Benjamin said with a mother's certainty. I can see it in the way she looks at him. I know, Cole said, resignation and acceptance in his voice. Just like I knew you were going to say yes to me eventually, even when you were still insisting you wanted nothing to do with me. Benjamin smiled, remembering. I was not very nice to you in the beginning. You were terrified. There is a difference. Cole stood, pulling her to her feet. Come on, Mrs. Tanner. Let us go inside and see what our daughter is giggling about. And tomorrow I want to ride out to the north pasture with Robert and check on the new calves. Will you come with me? Always, Benjamin said and meant it. That night, lying in bed with Cole's arms around her and the sounds of their home settling around them, Benjamin said a prayer of thanks for the stubborn cowboy who had walked into a saloon in Piotch, Nevada in 1878, and refused to accept that her story was over. He had proven her wrong about second chances in the most beautiful way possible, and every day since had been a gift. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, her hand clasped in Cole's, her heart full of love and gratitude and the deep, abiding joy that came from a life well lived with a man well loved. The woman who had sworn she would never give her heart to another man as long as she lived had discovered that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you swore you would never do, and that second chances were not just possible but necessary for a heart to truly heal and grow and become whole again. Outside, the Oregon night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. The ranch slept, cattle lowing softly in the distance, horses shifting in their stalls, the land at peace. And in the house, Cole had built with his own hands. Two people who had found each other against all odds rested together, their story complete, their love enduring, their lives proof that hope and persistence and faith in second chances could create something lasting and true and utterly beautiful. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and inevitable sorrow. In 1915, Thomas was killed in a training accident with the Army, a loss that devastated the entire family. Benjamin and Cole grieved together, supporting each other through the pain just as they always had. They found comfort in their other children, in their growing number of grandchildren, in the knowledge that Thomas had lived a life of purpose and honor, even if it had been far too short. Grace married her young man in 1911, a simple ceremony at the ranch that reminded Benjamin so much of her own wedding to Cole that she cried tears of both joy and nostalgia. Grace and her husband built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, staying close to family while creating their own life. They gave Benjamin and Cole 4 more grandchildren, rambunctious kids who loved to explore the ranch and pester their grandfather for stories about the old days. Cole taught all his grandchildren to ride, just as his father had taught him. He was patient and kind, never losing his temper even when the children were difficult, always ready with a word of encouragement or a piece of hard candy from his pocket. Benjamin watched him with their grandchildren and fell in love with him all over again, seeing in his aged face the same man who had courted her so persistently in Piotch all those years ago. In 1920, when Benjamin was 66 and Cole was 68, they made a trip back to Nevada. It was a journey prompted by Benjamin's desire to see Robert's grave one last time, to make sure it was being maintained, to say a final goodbye to the young man who had been her first love. Piotch had changed in the decades since they had left. The silver mines were mostly played out, and the town had shrunk to a fraction of its former size. The Lucky Silver Saloon was still standing but under new ownership, its interior different enough that Benjamin barely recognized it. They visited the cemetery on a hot summer day, and Benjamin stood at Robert's grave while Cole waited respectfully at a distance. "I kept my promise to live," Benjamin said softly to the weathered headstone. "I was wrong about second chances, Robert, so wrong. I hope wherever you are, you know that. I hope you are glad I found happiness again. You would have liked Cole. He is stubborn and kind, and he made me laugh when I had forgotten how. He gave me children and grandchildren and a life I could never have imagined. And I loved him just as much as I loved you, but in a different way, and I hope that is okay." She stood there for a few more minutes, letting the Nevada sun beat down on her, feeling at peace in a way she had not expected. Then she returned to Cole, took his hand, and they walked out of the cemetery together. "Ready to go home?" Cole asked. "Yes," Benjamin said, looking up at him with eyes that were still bright despite her age. "Let us go home." They returned to Oregon, to their ranch, to the life they had built. They lived out their remaining years surrounded by family, watching their grandchildren grow, seeing the world change in ways they could never have imagined when they were young. Automobiles replaced horses. Electricity came to the ranch. The world grew smaller and faster and more connected. But through it all, Cole and Benjamin remained constant. They still held hands on the porch in the evenings. They still looked at each other with love. They still thanked God and luck and stubborn persistence for bringing them together all those years ago in a dusty saloon in Piach. Cole died first, in the winter of 1925, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73. Benjamin woke to find him gone, his hand still clasped in hers, his face peaceful. She grieved deeply, but without the crushing, hopeless despair she had felt when Robert died. This grief was different. It hurt, but it was the hurt of losing someone after a long, full life together, not the sharp agony of a future stolen too soon. She buried him in the small cemetery near their church, surrounded by family and friends and neighbors whose lives Cole had touched. At his funeral, she spoke about the cowboy who had walked into her life and refused to take no for an answer, who had proven to her that second chances were possible, who had given her 46 years of marriage and more happiness than she had thought possible. Benjamin lived another 3 years, staying on the ranch with Robert and his family, watching over her grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were already starting to arrive. She spent her days in the garden, rocking on the porch, telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. She talked about Piach and the lucky silver, about the hard years after Robert died, about the day a green-eyed cowboy changed everything. She made sure her grandchildren knew that love was worth the risk, that second chances were precious, that walls built around hearts could be dismantled with patience and persistence and genuine affection. On a spring morning in 1928, Benjamin Turner Tanner died in her sleep at the age of 74. Her children found her in her bed, a peaceful smile on her face, a photograph clutched in her hand. It was a picture taken on her wedding day to Cole, the two of them standing in front of the church in Piach, looking at each other instead of the camera, so obviously in love that it radiated from the faded image. They buried her next to Cole, their headstones simple but elegant, marking the resting place of two people who had found each other against odds, who had built a life and a legacy together, who had proven that hearts broken by loss could heal and love again if given the chance. The ranch continued on, passed down through generations. The house Cole had built with his own hands still stood, expanded and modernized but fundamentally the same. The porch where Benjamin and Cole had spent countless evenings remained, a place where their descendants gathered and told stories, and remembered the stubborn cowboy and the heartbroken saloon woman who had taken a chance on second chances and created something beautiful. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the light was just right, those who lived there swore they could see two figures sitting on that porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, a testament to the enduring power of love and the precious gift of second chances.